How one conversation at a party sent my abusive sister to jail. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, a plain cream-colored envelope that felt heavier than it should. It sat on my small kitchen counter, a foreign object in a life I had meticulously scrubbed clean of my past. For over a decade, my world had been a carefully curated space, populated only by the quiet hum of my refrigerator, the clatter of my own keyboard, and the occasional, precious laughter of a friend. This envelope was a grenade, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled my bones, that pulling the pin would unleash a hell I had barely survived the first time. My name is Maya, I'm 29, and for the first 18 years of my life, I was the ghost in my own family's home. My existence was, as my parents often reminded me, a mistake. They were 50 now, my father and mother, but they were barely 20 when I was born, a few short months after a wedding they hadn't planned on. They were devoutly pro-life, so termination was never on the table, but their resentment was a third parent in our house. It tucked me in at night with cold indifference and woke me in the morning with a sigh of disappointment. I was the anchor that had tethered their youthful, carefree dreams to the rocky shore of premature responsibility. I was the black sheep, the scapegoat, the living, breathing embodiment of a future they never wanted. I don't have many clear memories of my early days, only a lingering feeling, a pervasive sense of being perpetually in the way. The real memories, the ones with sharp edges, begin around the time my sister, June, was born. I was 5. June was the planned child, the perfect, golden daughter they had envisioned. Her arrival cemented my status as the family's resident failure. The contrast in our upbringings was a brutal, daily lesson in my own worthlessness. While June was showered with affection, her every coo and gurgle a source of parental delight, my presence was an irritation. Her scraped knees were met with frantic kisses and cartoon bandages, my childhood fevers were treated with a sigh, and a bottle of children's Tylenol left on my nightstand. The neglect was a constant, cold companion, but it soon curdled into active abuse. My parents never left marks that a teacher or a doctor might see. They were masters of the unseen wound. The beatings were usually delivered with an open hand, sharp slaps to the back of the head or the legs that stung more with humiliation than pain. The real weapon was their words, the casual cruelty that stripped me down to nothing. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" my father would mutter as I struggled with my math homework. "Honestly, it's like you try to be a disappointment," my mother would say, looking at AB on my report card as if it were a declaration of war. June, 5 years my junior, learned her lessons from the masters. She absorbed their contempt for me like a sponge. She was never my little sister. She was their tiny, loyal soldier in the ongoing campaign against Maya. She hit me, bit me, and broke my things, knowing she would never face repercussions. The one time I defended myself, pushing her away after she'd torn a drawing I'd spent hours on, I was starved for 2 days. I was locked in my room with only water, listening to the sounds of my family eating dinner, laughing, living a life from which I was completely excluded. After that, I gave up. I became her punching bag, a silent, hollowed-out girl who learned that the path of least resistance was the only way to survive. The only flicker of warmth in that cold, desolate landscape was my grandmother. She saw everything. She knew the full, ugly truth. She tried to intervene, her voice a frail but determined shield, but my parents would threaten to cut her off, to take me away where she could never see me again. They punished me for her interference, making the abuse worse, so eventually, I begged her to stop. I learned to build walls, to bury my emotions so deep they couldn't be used as weapons against me. The day I turned 18, I walked out of that house with a single duffel bag and never looked back. The silence from them was deafening and, in a strange way, liberating. I was officially unwanted. And the confirmation was a key that unlocked my cage. The decade that followed was a struggle. I floundered through community college, the echoes of being stupid and useless sabotaging every exam. I ended up working a series of minimum wage jobs, scraping by in a tiny apartment that was, for the first time in my life, a true sanctuary. It was mine. No one could scream at me here. No one could hit me. I slowly, painstakingly, began to build a life. I made a friend, Sarah, a vibrant, loud woman who bulldozed her way through my carefully constructed walls and decided she was going to stay. She taught me that I was worthy of friendship, of kindness. I was still not financially well off, but I was surviving. I was breathing. And then the invitation. After 10 years of blessed, healing silence, June had invited me to her engagement party. I laughed when I saw it, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in my quiet kitchen. I immediately called my grandmother. She confirmed it wasn't a mistake. June had gotten my address and phone number from her, insisting that she wanted me there. For appearances, I suppose, my grandmother had sighed, her voice laced with a weary sadness. I had no intention of going. Why would I? To be a prop in her perfect life? But then, my parents called. For the first time in 10 years, their names flashed on my phone screen. Their voices were unnervingly polite, a saccharine sweetness that set my teeth on edge. They asked me to come, for the family. Against my better judgment, against every survival instinct screaming in my head, I agreed. I told myself it would be a test. I would show up, prove to myself that they no longer had any power over me, and leave. I was so wrong. The party was at a chic, upscale restaurant with fairy lights and an open bar. It was a world away from the cramped, tense house I grew up in. June was radiant in a white dress, the perfect golden child playing the part of the blushing bride-to-be. She and my parents greeted me at the door with their kisses and tight, performative smiles. They introduced me to her fiancé, Nate, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, they began to ignore me completely. I was a ghost again, just in a prettier room. Nate seemed like a decent guy. He had a kind smile and a firm handshake. My grandmother had told me he was a good man, and for her sake, I hoped it was true. I nursed a glass of club soda in a corner, planning my escape. But Nate kept seeking me out. He was tall, with warm, intelligent eyes, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my work, my life, where I'd been all these years. "June's told me so little about you," he said, a hint of confusion in his voice. "I feel terrible, we're only just meeting. You're going to be my sister-in-law, after all." The words hung in the air, a future I couldn't possibly imagine. He seemed oblivious to the toxic currents swirling around me. He even invited me to have lunch with him and June the following day. I gave him a vague, non-committal answer, my mind reeling. I was sure June would rather swallow glass than have lunch with me. But his kindness was a balm, a strange and welcome warmth in the frigid atmosphere of the party. I decided to stay a little longer just to talk to him. That was my mistake. June noticed. I saw her eyes narrow from across the room, a familiar flicker of possessive rage. A moment later, she was at my side, her fingers digging into my arm like talons. "We need to talk," she hissed, her smile never leaving her face for the benefit of the other guests. She dragged me through a set of glass doors and onto the restaurant's manicured lawn, the cool night air a stark contrast to the heat of her anger. The second the doors closed behind us, the mask dropped. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice a venomous whisper. "Stay away from Nate. You have no right to talk to him." Her words came in a torrent, a spew of hatred that had been simmering for a decade. "Did you really think this invitation meant anything? It was for show, you idiot. We had to invite you so people wouldn't ask questions. No one wants you here. No one has ever wanted you. You are the unwanted child, Maya. You always have been, and you always will be. You are a mistake, a burden we had to endure. Do you get it now? Stay away from my fiancé, stay away from my family, and stay away from my life." None of it was new. It was the same script, the same poison I had been fed my entire childhood. I had built up an immunity to it, a thick scar tissue around my heart. I just stood there, my face a blank mask, waiting for the storm to pass. I didn't cry. I didn't fight back. I just absorbed it the way I always had. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice flat. Her face contorted with fury. "Get out," she spat. "Get out of my party. Now." I turned and walked away, without another word. As I headed back through the restaurant to collect my purse, I saw Nate standing by the glass doors, a cigarette held loosely in his hand, his face pale and etched with an expression of pure shock. He had heard. He had heard everything. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I just fled, escaping back to the safety of my apartment, the familiar silence a comforting blanket after the storm. The real fallout didn't begin for another 2 days. It started with a text from June, a string of curses and accusations. Then my mother called, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then my father, his voice a low, menacing growl. They came at me in waves, a coordinated assault of blame and fury. I was a life ruiner. I had sabotaged June's happiness. I had broken up her engagement. Piecing together the story from their incoherent rants, I understood that Nate had confronted June after the party. He had seen a side of her she had kept perfectly hidden, a monstrous, cruel side. He was reconsidering everything. The engagement, the wedding, their entire future. And now they had a demand. It was so audacious, so utterly delusional, that it almost made me laugh again. They wanted me to fix it. They wanted me to call Nate and lie. I was to tell him that June's vicious tirade was just a normal sisterly squabble. That we loved each other deeply. That her words were just a joke. A bit of dramatic flair. I was to perform the role of the loving sister I had never been allowed to be, all to save the engagement of the woman who had just reminded me I was an unwanted mistake. The pressure was immense. My phone buzzed and rang incessantly, a constant, shrill reminder of their demands. For a fleeting, desperate moment, I considered it. I thought about just doing what they wanted, just telling a lie, to make them stop, to make them leave me alone forever. The thought of sinking back into that familiar silence was so tempting. But then I looked around my small, peaceful apartment. I thought of my friend Sarah, who loved me for who I was. I thought of my grandmother, who had always been in my corner. And I thought of Nate, a kind man who deserved to know the truth about the woman he was about to marry. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had simply existed, and my existence had reflected the ugliness in them. I spoke to my grandma, my voice trembling. "You did the right thing, my dear," she said firmly. "You did nothing. They are the ones who are wrong. Perhaps it's for the best. That boy doesn't deserve to be trapped in a life with a woman as cold as your sister." Her words were a lifeline. I was right to ignore them. But the harassment didn't stop. Their words, laced with decades of practiced venom, started to seep through the cracks in my defenses. The old feelings of worthlessness, of being the problem, began to bubble up. I started to question myself. Was I being selfish? Was I ruining my sister's life, even if she deserved it? The weight of it all was becoming unbearable. I felt myself starting to crumble. The sheer volume of support that poured in after I first shared my story was a tidal wave that washed away some of the toxic sludge my family had dumped on me. For so long, I had accepted my reality as a grim, unchangeable fact. Reading comment after comment from strangers, all validating my experience and condemning my family's cruelty, was like stepping out of a dark, soundproof room and realizing the world was full of color and noise. It opened my eyes to the true depth of the abuse I had normalized. My whole life has been an exercise in emotional suppression. I learned early on that showing any vulnerability, any sadness or anger, was like handing my parents a freshly sharpened weapon. So, I built a fortress inside myself, a place where emotions went to die. I became an expert at acting nonchalant, at shrugging off insults that felt like stab wounds, at pretending I was unaffected by a complete and utter lack of love. It was a coping mechanism, a survival strategy, but it had left me hollow. I was terrified that if I ever let the dam break, the resulting flood of pain would be so immense it would sweep me away entirely, leaving me catatonic in a psych ward with no one to pull me out. That fear, the terror of losing myself to the trauma, is why I have so meticulously avoided looking too closely at my own past. Many people asked about my grandmother, some even criticizing her for not doing more, for not getting me out of there. I need to defend her. She is a frail woman, battling a host of her own health issues. If she had called Child Protective Services, she would have been deemed an unfit guardian. I would have been swallowed by the foster care system, a fate that terrified both of us. She did what she could. She asked our extended family, but no one was in a financial position to take in an extra child. My aunts and uncles have their own families to feed. I don't blame them. It wasn't their responsibility to clean up my parents' mess. They tried to reason with them, but my parents responded with threats and then punished me severely for their interference. Eventually, I learned to keep my mouth shut, to protect the few people who showed me kindness by not involving them. The weight of all this new validation, combined with the relentless harassment from my family, was becoming too much to bear alone. I took a deep breath and did something I hadn't done in years. I asked for help. I called my friend, Sarah, and I showed her everything. I let her read my post, the raw, unvarnished truth of my life. Then, sitting on her comfortable, worn-out sofa, I finally let the dam break. I sobbed, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from a place of childhood agony I had long since buried. It was ugly and messy, but Sarah just held me, her strong arms a promise that I wasn't going to be swept away. She promised to help me find a therapist, to be there for every step of the terrifying journey ahead. For the first time, I didn't feel completely alone in my fight. I moved in with her temporarily, unable to face the silence of my own apartment, where every buzz of my phone felt like an incoming attack. In the midst of this emotional upheaval, a new complication arose. Nate, June's now ex-fiancé, started texting me. He was polite, but persistent, begging me to meet with him. Apparently, June, in a moment of supreme arrogance, had told him that he needed to hear the truth from me. She was so convinced of her power over me, so certain that I would crumble under our family's pressure, that she believed I would feed him the lies they had concocted. She thought she was calling my bluff, but she had inadvertently handed me a loaded gun. I was torn. My mind was a chaotic mess of old trauma and new anxieties. Part of me wanted to block his number and disappear, to sever this last, painful link to my family. But another part, a part strengthened by the support I'd received, knew that I couldn't. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Nate, a good man who was on the verge of marrying a monster. It was about any potential children they might have, children who could become the next generation's scapegoat. I knew I had to talk to him. I had to tell him everything. I decided to meet him before my first therapy session. I felt that right now, in my state of raw, heightened emotion, I could still be a detached narrator of facts. I feared that once therapy began to peel back the layers of my trauma, I wouldn't be able to speak about my past without becoming an emotional wreck. I needed to do this while I still had the illusion of control. I texted Nate and agreed to meet. I spent an entire evening saving screenshots of the vile text messages my parents and June had been sending me, organizing them into a folder on my phone. It felt like preparing evidence for a trial. I asked Sarah to come with me, to be my silent support, a lighthouse in the storm I knew was coming. She agreed without hesitation, promising to sit at a nearby table and only intervene if I started to fall apart. As I prepared for the meeting, a profound exhaustion settled over me. Reliving the past, even just to organize texts, was draining the life out of me. I had to take time off work, telling my boss I was dealing with a family emergency, a lie that was painfully true. I was dreading this conversation, dreading the act of tearing open my old wounds for a near stranger. But I knew it was the right thing to do. Nate deserved the truth. He deserved a chance to save himself from the lifetime of misery my sister would undoubtedly inflict upon him. I met Nate at a quiet coffee shop the next evening. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual warm smile was replaced by a look of haggard anxiety. He was a man caught in a nightmare, and I was about to turn on all the lights. We skipped the small talk. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, and just said, "Please, just tell me what's real. Tell me about your family." And so I did. I started at the beginning, my voice a low, steady monotone as I recounted a childhood devoid of warmth, a life spent as the family punching bag. I told him about the neglect, the beatings that left no bruises, the constant psychological warfare. I showed him the phone, letting him scroll through the endless stream of venomous texts from June and my parents, their words a stark, undeniable testament to their cruelty. It was a 3-hour conversation, punctuated by long, heavy silences. At some point, the dam inside me broke again. The tears came, hot and furious, a release of decades of pent-up anger and grief. Nate was crying too, his own quiet tears of shock and disillusionment. Sarah, seeing my distress, quietly moved to our table, her hand on my back a steady, grounding presence. She filled in the gaps when my voice failed, her calm narration a stark contrast to my emotional unraveling. Nate was incredibly gentle, repeatedly telling me I didn't have to continue, but I pushed on. It felt like a necessary exorcism. I had to get the poison out. He told me his side of the story. June had always painted me as a distant, career-obsessed older sister who was too busy for family. He'd had no reason to doubt her. My parents had been nothing but charming to him, the perfect, loving in-laws-to-be. The engagement party was the first time the mask had slipped. Hearing June's tirade had been like a lightning strike, illuminating the darkness he never knew existed. He had tried to get the truth from June, but she had gaslighted him, accusing him of overreacting, insisting that her cruel words were just how sisters talk. He then went to my parents, hoping for clarity, but they had doubled down, painting me as a jealous, drama-loving troublemaker who was trying to ruin their perfect daughter's happiness. Desperate, he had called the one person he thought might be honest, my grandmother. She had told him the truth, a horrifying story that shattered his image of the woman he loved. He had told June the wedding was off. Her reaction was a maelstrom of tears and rage. She accused him of overreacting. She accused my grandmother of lying, claiming I was the favored grandchild, and she was just trying to cause trouble. He was so confused, so overwhelmed, he didn't know what to believe. That's when June, in her infinite arrogance, had given him my number, confident that I would be her loyal, terrified puppet. She had no idea that I was finally cutting my own strings. At the end of our meeting, we were both emotionally shattered. There was nothing left to say. Later that night, Nate texted me. "I'm leaving her," he wrote. "For good. Calling off the engagement isn't enough. I can't be with someone who is so capable of such evil." I felt a profound sense of relief, but also a knot of dread. I knew what was coming. The storm was about to hit, and I was standing directly in its path. I braced myself. The 3 days after my meeting with Nate were an eerie, unsettling calm before a hurricane. Then he ended it. He had wisely moved his most important belongings out of the apartment he shared with June before calling her to tell her it was over. Her reaction was even more unhinged than we could have anticipated. It began with tearful begging and promises to change, to start treating me better, if that's what it would take. When Nate refused to engage, she went ballistic. She sent him videos of herself systematically destroying everything he owned that was left in the apartment, smashing his television, shredding his clothes, a wild, crazed look in her eyes. Then the stalking began. She showed up at his friends' houses, at his parents' house, creating such a scene that the police had to be called. She even came to his workplace, but was thankfully denied entry by security. Undeterred, she waited for him, followed him, and cornered him. The situation escalated until the police were involved again. She was becoming a menace, a woman completely consumed by her own rage. And then, she turned that rage on me. She knew I worked a second job in the evenings at a local restaurant. She waited for my shift to end. As I was walking across the dimly lit parking lot, I heard the roar of an engine. I looked up to see her car, the same one I'd seen at the engagement party, accelerating directly toward me. For a split second, I froze, a deer in the headlights of my own sister's murderous fury. Adrenaline kicked in, and I threw myself to the side, tumbling hard onto the asphalt. The car swerved past, missing me by inches. I lay there, gasping, a sharp, searing pain shooting up my arm. I had escaped being crushed, but in the fall I had broken my arm. The aftermath was a blur of police, paramedics, and court filings. I wasn't alone this time. Sarah was my rock. Nate was a constant, supportive presence, and my extended family, finally aware of the full extent of my parents' monstrous behavior, rallied around me. For the first time, I felt the embrace of a real family. My parents, predictably, blamed me for everything. They sent messages telling me I deserved to die, that I was sending their perfect daughter to jail. The case is still making its way through the legal system, but it's clear June will face jail time and will have to pay me compensation, a bill I'm sure my parents will foot. My grandmother has disowned them. The rest of the family has cut them off completely. We all have restraining orders in place. The last 3 months have been the hardest of my life. I started intensive therapy, confronting demons I didn't even know I had. There are good days and there are terrible days, days when the depression feels like a physical weight pinning me to my bed. But I am healing. My roommate, Sarah, has been my savior. And Nate, who has his own restraining order against June, has been an unexpected pillar of support. We've bonded through our shared trauma, finding a strange comfort in knowing someone else understands the particular brand of crazy we survived. I've thought about moving away, starting completely fresh, but I can't leave my grandmother, not now. Her health has declined under the stress of it all. So I will stay. I will build my new life here, surrounded by the family I have chosen and the family that has finally chosen me back. This journey started with a letter, an invitation back into a hell I thought I'd escaped. But it led to an unexpected liberation. I spoke my truth, and while the consequences were terrifying, they ultimately set me free. My sister's perfect world is in ruins, my parents are isolated and alone, and I, the unwanted child, am finally surrounded by love.